Hello, everyone. How's it going? Thank you so much for coming. I forgot that I'm doing something. I'm doing something important. I need to get out my little piece of paper. So before we get started, I'd like to acknowledge that we are meeting today on the traditional lands of the Kulin Nation. I pay my respects to their elders, past, present, and emerging, and to the elders of other communities who may be with us today. Now, so basically, you've probably all been to this sort of thing before, but we're going to talk for around 45 minutes, ramble away, and then you'll have 15 minutes to ask questions that you actually want to know the answers to. Afterwards, you can buy a bunch of books back there. There'll be these guys will be doing signings. I've got to pimp my own book because my second book, Wife and the Widow, doesn't come out until next week, but we're selling it here today. So please buy them to make me feel less insecure about it.
Is it for sale today?
It's for sale today. Yeah, just for one day only. And I've got a lot of nerves about it, so you can really help my mental health by buying some. So I'll do a quick intro, even though you all know who these wonderful, incredible genius writers are. Sarah Bailey, and I'm doing a bit of reading now, but I'll be more casual. Sarah Bailey is the author of 3 riveting crime novels, all starring the young detective Gemma Woodstock. The first, The Dark Lake, won both the Ned Kelly Award and the Sisters in Crime Davitt Award for a debut crime novel. Third novel in the series, Where the Dead Go, came out 5 weeks ago, I think. It sees Gemma investigating a murder in a small coastal town, which seems to be a real theme. We're all writing books set in coastal towns. Then you've got Mark Brandi's best-selling debut novel, Wimmera, won the coveted British Crime Writers Association debut Dagger. It's a mouthful, and was named Best Debut at the 2018 Australian Indie Book Awards. His new novel, The Rip, his latest novel, is about a young woman sleeping rough, set in inner-city Melbourne, and it draws on Brandi's own experience from working in the criminal justice system. You can tell I ripped that offline because I would never have written Brandi, I was thinking I should have reworded that. I just copied and pasted them. But that's a very nice segue. Mark's kind of history in the criminal justice system is a nice segue into my first question, which is, I just want to talk about backgrounds a bit and what drew you both to writing crime. And Mark, let's start with you because I know it was always inevitable from everyone in your family, but also your father, I learnt recently, was had this awful brush with the law for his gambling habits, right? So maybe you can tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, people who've probably heard me speak know a little bit about my professional background, that I worked in the Justice Department for about 10 years. All my siblings, 3 older brothers, all work for Victoria Police, so I'm kind of surrounded by crime stories in a way. But yeah, my dad, because I grew up in a country town in Western Victoria, Stawell, where Wimmera is set, and my parents ran a pub. They ran a pub there for about 30 years, and we were kind of like the only Italian family in town. So when, I suppose, it was in the 80s, and you're a reasonably successful business and you're Italian in this small country town, the police were kind of suspicious, I suppose. And and we had a really quite antagonistic relationship with the local police when I was growing up. It was pretty bad, to the extent that one time they got the Vice Squad down from Melbourne to raid the hotel on a Saturday night, and they sent in plainclothes police, so they were undercover, and then halfway through the night they just started arresting people, and they ended up they threw the book at my dad. They charged him with about a dozen different charges, serving people intoxicated, all fairly minor things, and they knew that they couldn't make anything stick in court, basically, and so they got him to plead guilty to one charge. And that charge was having illegal gambling on the premises. And what that was a footy tipping competition on the wall. And it was kind of it was just, I suppose, the whole experience, we were kind of victimised in a way, by the police. So it was odd, I think, that we all ended up working in that area. But you know, it's just like crime's just such a fascinating area, as you know.
Yeah. So it was really inevitable for you. You didn't really have a choice. But Sarah, what did you? What drew you to writing crime, and is there anything in your background, or where did that fascination come from?
I have no such good story. Like I don't know, because I didn't have any exposure to the criminal justice system. I had no family members that were involved in even law enforcement or the legal system. So I have no idea really where it came from, but I think it's probably more the storytelling part that was sort of potentially a little bit in my DNA, just in the sense that my family were very big readers and not so much writers, but I definitely from quite a young age was sort of drawn to storytelling and really wanted to be a journalist for a big part of my teenage years. So that's sort of what I was really heading toward. And then, yeah, just by default kind of ended up in marketing, which I guess is still sort of linked to storytelling.
Yeah.
But yeah, it wasn't, no, like I've literally just come from a meeting, it really is. But it's definitely a different kind of angle. And then the crime bent, I guess, I don't know, except for the fact that just every idea I ever had a dead body in it somewhere. So it kind of got to the point where it was just crime books that I was sort of writing or thinking about, but not intentionally.
Did you read a lot of crime books?
Yeah, I really did. And I think
Yeah.
I read sort of anything I could get my hands on.
Yeah.
And in my childhood sort of home, and still in my parents' home, there's this wall of books. And so that was the only thing that they actually weren't very strict about. They were quite sort of strict about, you know, what I could watch and all that sort of stuff, where I could go. But the bookshelf was kind of just open all the time. And so I just worked my way through that bookshelf, and no one ever seemed to be that fussed about what I was reading. So I'd sort of grabbed The Godfather off the shelf when I was about 9, read that. Was like, whoa, this is pretty crazy. All of the sort of forensic books that were really big in the 90s, like Patricia Cornwall's kind of stories, I read them when I was really, really young. And yeah, all sort of detective sort of fiction books and stuff too. So I think I like, quite drawn to the structure of crime books, I think.
Yeah.
I quite like the way that they're very much formulaic to an extent, and then sort of the conventions get broken. I find that interesting, maybe just from even a storytelling craft perspective, but then I love a book that keeps me wanting to read it. So I guess maybe that's why I like writing them. Yeah.
Yeah, it makes sense. It was sort of, all that influence probably just wiggled its way into your skull. But talking of crime books, and I'm going to out you. I'm so sorry, Mark. Mark confessed recently about he murdered someone and he buried the body. No, you confessed something interesting to me about, and I think it's good that we get these things off our chest. That's why I'm putting you in this situation.
I think you've confessed this to me. I think I can guess what you're about to say, because I think
Well, it's talk about the crime books you read before you wrote one.
Yeah, thanks, Christian. Look, I didn't have the sort of upbringing that Sarah had. Mine was not a particularly literary household, I have to say, and most of the books that I read were my older brother's books, and my eldest brother in particular, he read Stephen King like religiously, so that was the stuff that I was reading. So I confess, I'd never actually read a crime book at all before I started Wimmera. I hadn't read one, and when Hachette, my publisher, started marketing it as a crime novel, I was like happy, you know, but I was kind of terrified too.
Snobby.
Well, no, I wasn't a snob about it at all. It was just that I suppose I hadn't, you know, you tend to read the books that are recommended to you in a way, and that no one had ever kind of recommended a crime book to me.
And it's both of your books, they're unconventional crime books. Like they're not it's a cousin of a crime book, isn't it?
Yeah, and like now, having read a lot more crime books, like I love reading crime, but I can see that it is quite different. But I think and like Sarah was saying, like it's the conventions within the genre are so fluid in a way, and I think like a lot of books could be categorised as crime, but aren't, and it's almost like a marketing decision in some ways as to whether or not it gets pitched as such. Because I've seen my books in the Australian fiction section of bookshops or literary fiction. I see them in the crime section. I see them everywhere.
Yeah.
And I mean, if we think about more literary novels, let's say, and like Lolita. We need to talk about Kevin, which I know you love.
Yeah.
Like they've got crimes at their centre. They're about crimes. I even read a Willie Vlaughton book recently, Motel Life, which I loved, and it starts with like a hit run. And so many novels, I think, have either, it might not be a legal crime, let's say, it might not be defined as such, but it could be a moral or a social, like the slap Christos Cholkas. It's got like a social crime at its core. It needs something to drive it along. I'm trying to excuse the fact that I've never read crime fiction. I'm just trying to.
I know I threw you in the deep end, but part of me loves that because I don't know. I kind of there's a detail I love about your work because it doesn't feel crimey, but it has those mystery elements. And
look, and I think it's probably partly because too I was surrounded by so much crime in a way, and crime stories. And even in my partner, she's here today. She works like in the county court as well, so I hear a lot of stories all the time. So I probably didn't feel a great need to be picking up books off the shelf, if you know what I mean. And even in a country town, one of the odd things about it, and partly why they make such good settings for crime novels, is the proximity.
Yeah.
You are so like when a serious crime happens. Like I remember there was a murder happened over the road from our pub, and if I can just digress, I'll tell this little story.
Please, yeah.
Because it's because I was like 10 years old, and it was a Saturday night, and it was a girl, she worked for us actually at the pub behind the bar for a while, and then she moved up north for another job, and went with her boyfriend, and they broke up. She came back to Stawell and moved into a building over the road. And her boyfriend, who she was estranged from, followed her. And they sort of they didn't get back together, but they were seeing each other a little bit. He murdered her. Oh my God. He stabbed her to death. And then when he left the premises, he stabbed himself to make it look as though he'd been attacked. And it was absolutely horrific. But the interesting thing about it, in a way, and this is what I mean about the proximity, like we knew this girl, we vaguely knew the offender. The copper who investigated, like who arrested him, knew him and was like, the guy was calling him by his nickname. The doctor knew who he was. Like everyone knows who the people are. So it's just this odd scenario which you don't get in the city. Like you can have really heinous crimes happen, and it could be in 2 streets away from you, but you're just so far removed from it in some ways.
Yeah. We're talking about setting. All your books have really unique setting. Sarah, each of the 3 books are completely different new settings. And maybe you could both. This is a good question for you both. But where in the writing process? This is one of the questions that really is just because I want to know. Hopefully someone in the audience wants to know this too. I just forgot to tell you all, this is being live streamed. So that's the detail I was meant to tell you. So you didn't have to come. You could have stayed at home and watched it on your computer. So where in the process does setting come from? So do you... does it all come in a bubble, or when? Especially, maybe we'll start with you, Sarah, because each of yours are so different. I guess my vague question is, can you talk about setting?
Sure. I think setting comes pretty early on in the idea formation sort of stage, because often a big part of a character is where they live, or where they come from, I suppose. But in terms of my books, with Gemma, I was quite clear from the start that this small town detective would be thrust into a murder case where she knew the victim, and there'd been sort of a bit of there was a past relationship that wasn't quite clear. And as Mark said, the proximity is your weapon, I think, in that kind of construct, because if a cop is going to investigate a crime and they know the victim, it's much more likely that's because the town that they both live in is quite small and a little bit claustrophobic. And then because in reality, most of the time, if someone's harmed, it's normally by someone that they know. So if you've got a smaller town setting, it means that everybody's a suspect, and it's kind of a little bit more viable that anyone in that orbit of that person might have committed the crime, and that everyone in the town would have a point of view on who that might be. So I think you just get the ability to amplify the whole circumstance and make it feel quite claustrophobic, I think is the best word to describe it. Whereas in the second book, the best thing about the fact that Gemma moved to Melbourne and that was the new sort of environment in which the whole story was set, was that it was the opposite. There was a lot of sort of anonymity to the crime, and it could have been anybody, and there wasn't a clear sort of link, and there wasn't this close circle of people. So it felt really sort of different in terms of the suspect list and the relationship with the crimes. The crimes, I think, felt a bit more clinical, and that was, I guess, a really nice sort of juxtaposition. So, yeah, I think setting is hugely important. I don't think that I'm a writer that sort of is really particularly amazing at depicting setting. I think there's people that do it a lot better, but
You do
while
a very
they're not,
good job.
I'm not looking for it. It's fine. It's more that I don't think the setting is a character in my book so much as perhaps it is in other people's stories. And like I've definitely read books where I'm like, gosh, that environment was basically the main character. I don't think my books are like that at all, but I do think that they are really important in kind of defining the characters and the way that they're operating in the world, and sort of, I guess, how big and small they feel in that space, I find really interesting. So, with this coastal town in the third book, I guess that was another opportunity for a small town gossip kind of feeling to take place, and everyone was a suspect and everyone knew everybody, and even though bad things were happening in the town, people had turned a blind eye for decades and things like that. So I think the setting just really amplifies all of those other aspects of the book that I really find interesting.
It felt like a real place, though, in
Thank
the
you.
third book. Was it based on
So I've had two funny things. In terms of my first book, where the fictional town Smithson, that was a holding name for almost the entire draft, because I was like, generic town, Smithson. And then it kind of stuck, and people quite liked it when they were reading it. So I was like, okay, well, we can call it Smithson. And that was kind of based on a bit of an amalgamation of Albury, Wodonga kind of vibe. So it was that sort of, probably a little bit smaller, but that was sort of a bit of the inspiration for that. And then in this recent book, another fictional town was Fairhaven, which again was like, it's actually an unfair town. So I was like, it's a fair haven, how ironic. And that stuck. I'm not even kidding. And I did, in my mind, sort of know what I wanted that town to be in terms of construct, sort of like rough population and things like that. So I found a few places that were in the region that I had in my mind and researched those, just in terms of sort of local kind of like trees and the kind of beach environment and things like that, just to make sure that it kind of felt right for the climate and weather and things like that. Yeah.
And like with Mark, with Wimmera in particular, that's based on your childhood town, right? Was that? I imagine it would have been helpful writing, but does anyone sort of people who live there, have they commented about it?
Yeah, you know those, when you drive through country towns and they have that sign out the front which says population X and home of blah blah famous person. They haven't got one of those for me.
I was about to get so excited.
No.
But there is a dartboard with...
There probably is. There's effigies being burned, pitchforks, torches being carried. No, it probably irritated quite a few people. I have to say, I kind of toyed with the idea of de-identifying it, but when you write your first novel, you kind of you throw the kitchen sink at it in a way.
Yeah.
You're just drawing on everything you've got to make this world as real as possible. And I think that there's a lot of stuff from my youth and growing up in that town which was still kind of unresolved for me in a way. And when I sat down to write, it wasn't like a conscious thing of like, I'm going to set this in this town. It was just the sort of stuff that I started writing tended to be all set in a rural town, in a rural environment, and I could see that place really, really clearly. And I suppose in the context of the novel, it was it made sense for it to be set there. And part of the what I was really interested in was the way, and this is what interests me about setting, is the extent to which it works on character, you know, and what it does to character. And in the case of Wimmera, you sort of see what I saw really growing up there too is, you know, this kind of bucolic existence of childhood and the freedom that you have, and you go out and do whatever you like and go fishing and all that sort of stuff, which is great. But then when you hit a certain age, when you get to adulthood, potentially, the walls start closing in on you, and you start to be, you know, defined as whatever person people think you are, and you know, it's just the opportunities start to dry up, and I think for one of the characters in the book, Fab, that was really important, that this world starts closing in, and kind of the secrets from his past, for lack of a better description, start to catch up with him as well. In the Rip, that's quite different because it's an urban setting. It's set in Melbourne. It's set in an environment I know very well in a city, and it was partly just a response to what I was seeing and what I was experiencing, which is, you know, the homelessness becoming more visible. The heroin issue becoming more and more visible, and you know, with deadly effect down in Abbotsford. And I suppose, again, it wasn't a really calculated decision. I was just sat down to write and started off with that character.
And again, it's the character, you know, the character setting, they go hand in hand, I think. The Rip in particular.
Very much so, very much. And I often, you know, the descriptions of setting it's an interesting thing to talk about, because I heard someone saying this. So they're talking like about historical fiction, and that, like, say Anna Karenina or like Tolstoy, and fiction from a different age, let's say pre-internet, and where Tolstoy's, you know, describing a Russian palace somewhere and doing it beautifully and talking about all the details and what a couch looked like and the flow of someone's gown and all of that. It's beautiful, it's lyrical and poetic, but it's also by necessity, because in the days when people were reading those books, they didn't necessarily know. They hadn't seen it. Whereas now, you know, go on Google Maps or Street View, you can see pretty much anything. You can access anything.
Yeah,
so
you do have to decide kind of how much detail you include, and people don't need as much detail these days because they've got such great mental shortcuts to kind of what you're referring to. So I think you're right. It has gotten like less flowery over time, probably, all writing, because people don't need as much help in visually kind of understanding it. Yeah,
I think it's a bit of in a good way, a bit of a cheat as well, because the more you leave out, the more the reader just fills in, and they think you're doing a better job than you are. Do you know what I mean? It's sort of, I really feel like that. I really feel like, you know, you just leave stuff out and they think it's better for some reason.
I want to ask you a question, Christian.
Yeah.
Just about the setting, because I remember doing an event with you, I don't know if it was last year or early this year, down in Ocean Grove.
Yeah, yep.
And Christian had moved to Ocean Grove. Is that right?
Yeah, I moved there about 1.5 years ago, and then now my latest book is set. It's a fictional town, but it's on the Bellarine Peninsula.
I remember on that night you revealed to the audience the fact that it was based on their town, and there was like gasps in the audience. I think everyone
was really nervous. Yeah, and, you know, weirdly, Stacey, who runs Book Grove, the bookshop there, my local bookshop, she's lovely. We become good friends. Her kids babysit my dog sometimes. She started reading the book, and I've not heard from her. It's been a couple of weeks, so I am worried that I may have either she hates it or I've made a few, because it's a coastal town as well, but it's a tourist town during the winter, which is, you know, which is like Ocean Grove. In the summer, it's packed and bustling, but then everyone goes away, and it's this kind of eerie and it's just a good setting. Anyway. I don't have to talk about. I don't want to. You know, I'll just put the attention back on you guys. I want to talk about research. Again, this is another boring question. Maybe I wanted to sort of know how much research you both do and when, and is it before or after, or does how much research affects the story? Maybe Sarah, we'll start with you.
Yeah, sure. I do zero research before I start my story.
Yeah.
Because I know myself what I would be like, and that would be that I would never actually write the book, and I would get really hung up on all the things that can't happen. So I tend to try to just think about what is my idea, what do I want to, what's the premise, and then get the first draft done without really kind of any research at all. And the only time I would sort of jump ahead and do some research would be if I'm like, oh, I really don't know if this is even possible. It might be medical or it might be legal, but that would be the only time that I'd quickly kind of sidestep the writing and sort of Google search, desk research, and make sure that something's sort of feasible. But for the most part, I try to write the full draft with all of the knowledge I have of the crime world, or particularly in the last few years, it's been obviously police procedural kind of context. And then I go back and sort of fact check my own book and make sure that it is able to be sort of done, make sure that it's as realistic as possible in terms of the, the forensic information and the legal information and the medical information. And then I have a couple of people that I sort of now can go to who will not read the whole book, because I don't want their comments on the whole thing. I kind of just want their expertise on certain scenes that I know that they can verify for me. But I tend to sort of even then ask them for, is this possible, as opposed to just giving them it to read and then having them come back with sort of all of the problems. It's more like, I know it's not very likely necessarily, but is it possible?
I'm going to copy that. That
sure.
seems so smart to try to sort of, yourself so well and just not to be bogged down in the... Kind of,
someone said to me once, it's like approaching a book the way lawyers approach cases. They're looking for loopholes, and that's what I'm doing, because I don't want my book to necessarily be... It's not a true story. It's not true crime. I'm writing a fictional book. I want it to read fast and hard and fun. So I don't want sort of real life to, I guess, slow it down and ruin it for me. But I obviously don't want something that people are like, this has gone from crime to fantasy. This is crazy.
Yeah.
So it's got to be sort of in the realm of possibility. And I wouldn't write something that was just sort of far-fetched and makes people sort of go, oh, I can't engage in this now. It's sort of gone too far. But I think that when you open up for feedback from experts, they will come back and give you sort of the sort of most likely outcome, or all of their sort of historical information about things that they've worked on or crimes that they've been involved in. And I'm sort of like, yes, all that's great. I just want to know, is this possible? Is there precedent for this? Has it happened ever before in the world? Because, you'll end up with a very... sort of dull, sort of dumbed down kind of version of the story, I think. Yeah,
sometimes someone might say, well, it would probably happen this way.
Yeah.
Or that's why it's interesting that it's not happening.
Yes, yes, but could it happen the way I've done it?
Yeah.
Could it, is that possible?
Just yes or no. Don't elaborate.
Pretty much. Yeah. So you can borrow that. That's fine.
Yeah, no, I definitely will. This is really an exercise just for me I'm just mining you guys of information. Mark, specifically with the Rip, which is, about this young woman living really rough. Did you do any research, or did you just see what was around you, or how was that process?
Yeah, much like Sarah, I kind of approach my writing like I sort of research after the fact in a way, but I don't really, because your life is sort of research and your interactions with the world in a sense. So I think that over time I'd accumulated sort of enough information to be able to write this character and feel confident to write her story in that context. It was always, I was a little bit nervous about doing it because it's outside my direct experience, of course. I mean, I've known people with, really significant substance abuse issues. I've known people who've become homeless. But I suppose I didn't... I try not to present the story as being, I guess, the universal story of homelessness either, or of addiction. It's one person's story, one fictional character's story in a sense. And I guess any little tidbits that I needed to clarify afterwards, I did. I asked a few people about certain things, like this certain... I guess services that the main character accesses. She has interactions with the police as well, and obviously I've got family that I can ask about that. But yeah, it was always a bit of a tricky thing, and I didn't, when I wrote the draft, I didn't tell anyone what I was writing. I didn't discuss it with my partner. I didn't discuss it with my agent, my publisher, and I didn't mention it to anyone until I'd rewritten it and got it to a point where I thought it was okay. But I wasn't sure it would be published, you know. I was kind of, I think part of it was I was a little bit nervous that someone might turn around and say, you can't do this, Mark.
You're
you
so
know?
good at that. You're so secretive. I don't know how you do it. I tell everyone all of
Me
my
too.
ideas.
Yeah.
Like, it's probably really bad, actually, but I just tell strangers my ideas half the time, and then I think, oh, maybe that's not very smart.
Yeah. Mark
You're
is an
really good
annoyingly
at just being like, I'm not really working on anything right now.
Yeah, Mark's an annoyingly good human being, isn't he?
Yeah,
It's really,
yeah.
it's a bit too much
Right.
sometimes.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
It depends who you ask, Christian, I think.
We're just like giving out our ideas for the internet and stuff.
You want to hear about
Yeah,
this? Like,
yeah.
no, I don't even know you.
Well, I think it's partly superstition, to be honest.
Yeah,
it's a
right.
bit of superstition because I did have one experience. I wrote a manuscript which was based on a true story that my mum told me, and it was set in Italy. And I wrote this story, and I rewrote it and rewrote it. But before I did that, I told one of my friends about it, one of my writing friends, and I was so excited about this true story sitting behind it that I blurted it out and said, "Isn't it great?" You know, and she said, "Yeah, it sounds fantastic." And then when I went back to work on it, I felt burdened almost by the fact that I told someone about it, and I felt like almost a little bit guilty, and I couldn't make it work. I just couldn't. I spent almost 12 months on that manuscript just trying to get it to a point where I was happy with it, where it was doing the things that I wanted it to do, and it never ever did, in my view at least. And I mean, I don't blame the fact that I told someone about it, but I'm just sort of
Didn't
linking
help
the two.
Yeah.
It probably didn't help, and I never showed it to anyone. I've never shown it to anyone. It's still it's sitting on my desktop in a folder that I never opened.
Maybe it's like really, really good.
I don't think so. I don't think so. No, because I have gone back to look at it and just thought, and it causes me such angst. But maybe 5-10 years down the track, I might have some
Broken
insight.
ideas.
If the Australia Council want to give me a grant to go to Italy to research certain aspects, I'll do that.
For it.
You said, I've abandoned my thing now, but I'll return to it if we need more time. But you just said something that interests me, which was, and I ask every author this privately, so I'm sorry to talk about this because I'm obsessed with it. You said that you were writing The Rip and you weren't sure it was going to get published. This is after Wimmera. What made you feel that way? I guess my question is, and it's so interesting because you've got the second book and the two standalones, you've got a series. Where I'm going is how difficult it is to write a second book versus a series, and
I think it's sort of the nature of the writing life, though, isn't it? Like it just always feels like you're on the edge of some precipice and it's all going to collapse, and the rug will be pulled out from under you, or the publisher's going to go, Mark, yeah, it's been great, but no more. I don't know. I'm just plagued by, I guess, a lack of self-confidence when it comes to my writing, and you just want it to be the best it can be, and it's probably partly to just a response to the experience I had with the first manuscript, which it took me ages, to get that to a point that a publisher took it on, and multiple rejections and all that sort of stuff. So I didn't just send the manuscript out and it got picked up straight away. So I know I had direct experience of how difficult publishing can be, and I know how hard it is for publishers to market a book and to make it work. And it's a tough game, particularly in our market. So
because I've just brought my second book out, and it's very helpful to me to know that everyone feels this tremendous, horrible sense of impending doom. It's very helpful for me. Sarah, you've done a series, so in a way, is the expectation even higher? Because people must, at least Mark and I who have done standalones, we have the luxury of putting one character aside and doing fresh. Do you have readers who have an idea about where Gemma is going, and how do you navigate that world?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I'm pretty good at not worrying too much. I mean, we were speaking about this last week. I do think it's just very strange that people often will say things like, oh, you know, we want to see if that person's a bit of a one-hit wonder. And you're like, what if it was just one wonderful hit? That's not bad.
I love that.
Like,
that made me feel so good
you
when
know,
you said
it's
that.
so strange, I think, that we sort of are in this world where people are almost like, well, yeah, that was good, but, you know, what if that's it? And you think, well, what if that is it? That's fine. I think
it's
that
La
would be
Bamba,
fine.
you know,
Yeah,
well, so everyone
exactly.
knows it. What's
It's
the big
really
deal?
popular.
Yeah.
And so I think I was probably so happy for The Dark Lake to be published. And I mean, of course, the second it's published, you sort of want more and you wonder if there might be another book in you and you hope there is and all of those things. And then once you have a contract, you're like, okay, there really needs to be another book in me, so I better go and find it. But I think I am sort of the view that, you know, hopefully I can keep writing books, but if I can't, then I can't, and what am I going to do about it, you know?
Yeah.
And for me, books are such a massive wrestle anyway. Like, it really is just me against the words. I find it quite hard. It does feel like a bit of a battle, especially once the draft is down and I'm editing. So I just kind of have this view, I suppose, that I will get there. It just might be really difficult, and I might have to rewrite the book so many times, but it's possible. It's like my research questions. It's physically possible for me to write a book. It's just that it might take me 100 hours, it might take me 5,000 hours, but it will be possible. At the end of the day, it's just words on a page. So it's you know, it's an achievement that can be sort of reached. But yeah, I do think that the series thing it's both probably easier and more difficult. I mean, in some ways, I feel like I've just written 3 episodes of the one idea, and I guess that's probably easier than 3 separate worlds and 3 separate sets of characters and all of that sort of thing. But yeah, I do have people that sort of, I guess, have an expectation, or they have a point of view on what the character will do next. And that's amazing, really. Like, I mean, I feel very lucky that people are invested at all in a character I made up and have some sort of thought about what she might sort of do next. But yes, I think that writing a separate book altogether, I feel like it's almost starting all over again. So that's scary.
Are you working on one that's not in the series
yes,
now?
Yes, Christian, I am trying to.
And have you found that more freeing? Or?
I think it's probably a bit too early to tell, to be honest. Like, I kind of feel, it's kind of fun to be given a completely blank slate. But of course, I'm never ever going to have the blank slate that I had with The Dark Lake.
Yeah.
So even if it is a brand new idea, it still now feels like a different experience, even though it is new, because it's sort of now I'm like, well, I write crime, which I never ever thought about when I wrote The Dark Lake, and I sort of know how I can hear my editor in my head now when I'm writing, which I definitely didn't do when I had, you know, The Dark Lake.
And it's the time thing is huge, isn't it? Because with the first book you have all the time you need and also zero expectations, and I assume no one would ever read it. So it's just kind
definitely.
It's a different dynamic. For
yeah.
Sure. You start to become conscious of readers and reviewers and all that sort of stuff. So you try to kid yourself in a way that it's not there, that those voices aren't there, but increasingly they are.
Yeah.
That's just the reality.
Yeah, I think that's true.
I'm going to miss a bunch of questions, but I'm going to ask one that I was really excited to ask. Obviously, having interactions with readers is amazing and overwhelmingly positive and excellent. But you told a story, Mark, the other day that I want to hear again about a sort of a strange experience with a reader. And I was going to ask you, Sarah, if you've had any weird or negative interactions with readers.
I'm not going to repeat that answer here.
Are you worried?
It's live streamed, so the person might be
it was a really positive, wonderful
affected.
thing that someone did.
I did, yeah. No, so I'll tell another story though.
Oh yeah.
Actually,
just pick it from the list of weird reader interactions.
Weird reader interactions. I have a lot of great reader interactions, you know, and particularly with the RIP. Like, it's been amazing. And people who've been directly affected by homelessness or by addiction, by either themselves or people in their life, and it's something which I find deeply moving, I have to say, when I get those messages. But on a more lighter note, I suppose, actually, it was an event I did here. I think that you were supposed to be part. It was Emerging Writers Festival.
I was really sick.
and was sick
Yeah.
and couldn't do it. It was Emerging Writers Festival, and it was on, the topic was on the craft of crime writing. And it was myself and another author, and it was supposed to be Christian as well, but Christian couldn't make it. So we were talking about, very in depth about the craft of writing, about plotting versus pantsing, about our influences, about the life of a writer, all this sort of stuff, and sometimes quite technical stuff too. And the Emerging Writers Festival is such that, this was a full day really about writing and the craft of writing that people bought a ticket for. So it was a really, I suppose, engaged audience about the life of a writer, and they wanted to learn more about it. So we went through our whole talk, and then it came time for questions, and this guy stuck his hand up straight away, and microphone went over, and I was sort of like, gearing myself up for some tough question about writing. And he goes, "Oh, yeah. I just wanted to ask a question to you. You mentioned that you've got a book published," and I said, "Yeah." He goes, "Yeah, what was it called?" And I said, "My first book, Wimmera." He goes, "Oh, yeah. And then he goes, "How do you spell that?" So I said, Wimmera. He goes, "Oh, okay." He goes, "Thanks, Christian."
That's my favourite story ever.
That's pretty great.
So
How
if
did
your
you feel?
ego ever gets in the way, as a writer, it just gets shattered really quickly. I like being compared to this.
I was thinking the same thing. It's like, yeah, that's fine.
I was in Arizona, and I was there on Halloween Eve, and I was at a bookstore called The Poison Pen, which does, they're sort of a really big crime supporting bookstore, and this amazing kind of place in the middle of this tiny little town. And we did an event, and a guy came along and made me a Halloween cupcake and presented it to me in a box that was wrapped. And so it was a moment of fear, I think, where I was kind of not that scared, but he came up and put the box in front of me, and everyone sort of stepped back like one big step, and there was all these people, and I said, "Oh, what is that?" And he said, "If you want, you can open it tomorrow on Halloween." And I thought, "Oh, I think we probably should open it now while all these people are here. That might be better." And then I opened it, and it was this amazing cupcake that was all sort of shaped like a pumpkin with all this really quite impressive sort of stuff on it. And he said, "I made this pumpkin for you because you're going to miss Halloween. I know you're leaving. I've checked your schedule, and I know you're leaving tomorrow." And I said, "Oh, how did you do that?" And he said, "I have my ways." And I was like, "Okay."
And your mini bar is out of milk, but
Yeah.
I've got them to...
But he was very nice. I think he was just trying to be very nice. And then he said, "Anyway, I hope that you like it." And I signed the book, and then before I knew it, my publicist reached across the room and grabbed the box and just took it away, and I think put it in a bin, and I was never allowed to see it again.
Oh
So
my
it was
God.
sad, yeah.
Oh, that's such a sad
Yeah,
ending.
I think in America they're very security conscious, so I think he was a bit worried that
Yeah, and he
might
did
be a
bake it with
poison
anthrax
cupcake
or
or
something.
something,
Yeah.
yeah. So no.
I had another... We'll go to questions, and if we have any time at the end, it's another boring question. So we're going to go to you guys now. If anyone has a question, put your hand up. I can't see anyone. Oh, there is someone down here. I'm not meant to do this, that's why. So I sort of stare. I think it's a question in the front row.
Front row.
Yeah, right.
I'm really interested in unease, and I want to know if you think about it, how much a reader can stand and how much a reader needs.
Oh, it's such a good question.
That is a very good question.
Yeah. Tension, I guess, is the big thing in I suppose all writing in a way, but I think particularly in crime writing. In Wimmera, I was very conscious of it, and particularly with the way that Ronnie enters the scene, in that story, and you almost have as a reader, you're seeing the two young boys there, and you're fearing for them, and you know more than the characters, of course, and you're worrying for them, and that was important to me, and at the same time, you sort of don't want to over-egg it, so it's just like this tension in itself, with the tension of not not overdoing it, not being heavy-handed. But I suppose it's true, like both my books at least, that you are in this situation of looking over the main character's shoulders, or in the case of the Rip, through her eyes, and witnessing things that make you, worry deeply for the characters, and want the best for them, but know that there's these dark forces around. And I think that in crime, you're always playing with a bit of tension, I feel.
I think Mark's books are probably a better example of unease as a primary emotion. I think mine are a bit more sort of up and down, and it's not so much perhaps unease as it is just really punchy plot points that kind of come out of nowhere, and then it's the energy's right up again, and then it dips down a little bit, and then the energy's up again. It's probably more that I'm playing with. I think there's a couple of scenes that are probably really full of tension, and I hope some readers would sort of be a little bit anxious about what's going to happen. But I think unease is I think it's such a great sort of description of what I think really good domestic kind of fiction evokes. And I think that whole feeling of reading a book where you're sort of on tenterhooks the whole way through because you're just not quite sure who to trust and you're not quite sure what's going to happen, I think is a masterful thing to be able to kind of sustain, not so much create, but to sustain. But I don't actually know if I do it very well, but it's a good thing to think about. So it's a good question.
I enjoy how self-deprecating you are. I really enjoy it for some reason. They're such good books. Is there another question out there? I have one, if there's not. Well, you guys have a little think. I can't see any. I had a weird question again, but it's sort of about the people in your lives. So, Mark, it'd be sort of what your partner's relationship is to your books, and I'm really interested to know what your kids think about it and what you do. And either one of you can start.
My partner, she's been very supportive of me making the move into being a writer and not having a normal job. So I was fortunate, that she sort of, I guess, indulged me for a while. But I always knew that I felt like the clock was ticking as well. I thought I can't keep doing this forever, like being an unpublished author and sort of at home and doing the dishes and things like that. As nice as that might be. So she's my first reader, so she sort of engages with my work at a line by line level, and she's always the person I want to impress most when I write my work, and I want it to sing and to work for her. My family, my brothers and the stuff there, they're very supportive as far as brothers can be, It's like with brothers, like you could climb Mount Everest and they go, oh yeah, it's all right. What are you doing now? What are you doing tomorrow? But it's funny. I've told this story once or twice, but my mum is she's great, but she after Wimmera was out and after I won the Indie Award for best fiction, best debut fiction, I ran into one of my old work colleagues, actually, this guy Frank, and he saw me down the street and goes, "Oh, Mark, I just got to tell you, I finished Wimmera. It's fantastic. It's well done." And I was like, "Thanks." He goes, "Yeah. I have to tell you though, I saw your mum down the street the other day." I was like, "Yeah." And he goes, yeah. And he goes, I went up to her and I said, "Oh, Mrs. Brandi, Mark's made this leap into a new career and his book's going so well, you must be very proud." And she looked at him and said, "He used to have such a good job." And I asked her about it afterwards and she said yes. And it's funny because she's like she came to the launch for the Rip at Readings in Carlton, and she goes, "Who are all these people?" It's so it's just this really even for my siblings to an extent, but for my parents in particular, from a very working class, blue collar migrant background, the notion of being a writer is very esoteric. It's very strange. The fact they'll sit up in a room.
Right. It is pretty strange.
Yeah, it's weird.
It's a weird thing to do.
This is weird what we're doing right now. This is
really
really weird.
Strange.
Yeah.
And just sit in a room all day and make stuff up in a way, and people want to engage with it. I mean, she like Dad's in a nursing home nowadays, got dementia, so he's sort of missed out on it a little bit. But I think Mum's proud, but sort of slightly bemused about the whole thing.
I think it's a healthy amount. I got this horrible review on the Nowhere Child. Brutal review. And my older brother's just started texting me line by line the review. So I think it's there's something about that brings you down to earth and reminds you, you know. But what do your kids think about, I mean, what is their sort of, they think it's cool?
Well, I think when the first book came out, they were, 3 years younger, so probably less aware. I think they are starting to kind of understand now, and they quite like it. They'll often say things like, Rupert's mum's read your book. And I'm like, who's Rupert? Or whatever. And they'll be like, I don't know if she liked it or not though. Cool, that's fine. So there's a lot of that goes on. And then there is also, they really like, once I show them Goodreads, they love that because they can go on it by themselves and look up like, someone gave you 1 star, someone gave you this, and someone said, and then someone said this, and it doesn't make sense. And I'm like, that's fine, don't worry. So they're very good at sort of parroting back the feedback from people I receive. But I mean, they're sponges as well. I was telling them, they were asking me about 3 months ago about what I'm going to write next, and we were walking somewhere, so I was like, well, I've got this idea and this happens, and they were like, and what does that person do, and what's that person's name? And I was just, like I said, I tell everyone all of my ideas, so I was like, then this, then this, then this. And then now, if I'm ever at my computer, they say, which work are you doing, writing or advertising? And I'll say, writing. And then they'll go, have you written that bit about Dean yet, how he does that? And I'm like, how do you remember that? Like, it's quite impressive. So they're becoming much more interested, especially now that they're learning about storytelling and writing at school more. They've obviously been quite programmed. The way they ask about ideas, they always go, what is the problem of that book? So it's obviously something at school that they've learned, that there's always a problem or a tension, and so they're always like, what is the problem of that book? And when I was talking about your books, they were like, what are the problems of their books? And I'm like, so many problems. I don't know.
Don't get me started.
But so that's kind of funny. But my eldest son, it was about a year ago, I had the book on the bench for some reason. I think there was a overseas version being done, and they asked me to check something, and so I had it out. And I came into the room and he said, I read the first few pages of The Dark Lake. And I said, oh, okay. And I'm like, I don't care what they read, so I'm not very sort of I'm very liberal about that sort of stuff. And I said, what did you think of it? And he said, yes, I can see why people might like it. Okay. So it'd be great for them to one day read the books and tell me what they think.
I was thinking, what a gift for your mother to have published all these books and for that to be ahead of. I think it's such a gift you can give a kid. That's amazing.
So.
Are there any other questions out there? Yes. There's a few now.
One question for each of you. Mark, you write so convincingly the voice of the woman narrating so many things in the book. Did that cause you any problems? And Sarah, I wanted to know about Gemma because I haven't met her before. I've just read the first of your books, being the third book. Why is she so nervous? Talking about unease, you make her a very tense person. Why?
Want me to start?
You can start.
I don't know. I think Gemma's just had such a difficult life, I suppose, compared to me. I think a lot of the things that happened to her when she was a teenager have just really set her on a course for being very distrusting of not so much even other people, but of fate. So she knows bad things can happen. And so she's on high alert at all times that something bad is probably going to happen. And she's never more on alert than when she's happy. Because I think she feels sort of as if she's not ever going to let herself get into that comfort sort of zone because she doesn't trust the universe. So think that's kind of why she's nervous. And then, of course, because she's ended up being a homicide detective, it's reinforced every day because she sees all the bad things in the world. She filters out all the good things. And so she's sort of almost statistically, you know, drawn to the things that are kind of evil. And so I think that's probably why she's, nervous and sort of constantly on the edge.
In terms of the main character's gender in the Rip, I wasn't especially conscious of it at the beginning, and when I started to write it, and that first scene that you see in the book with her in the park, that's the very first thing that I wrote. Anton didn't exist at that point. Sunny, the dog, I just sort of like discovered them through her in a way. But as the book progressed, as I was drafting it, I became more conscious of her gender in how, I guess, she interacts with the world, and the extent to which it makes her vulnerable as well, exceptionally vulnerable, like doing sex work, and also sleeping rough. But I think, you know, the main, like, I wanted her to have agency at the same time. That was really important, that she's a strong person. But the main factors, I suppose, that I saw in her life and her world were the precariousness of her situation, economically, socially, health-wise, and the problems of her addiction as well. That they were sort of the forces, the bigger forces at play, I suppose. And I sort of, in recent news and, you know, this idea, not to get too political, but like of drug testing people on New Start allowance and all this sort of stuff, like, you just despair. I can't believe that debate is even happening in our community, and that it's accepted as a reasonable debate. I think it's just absolutely vile, to be honest. But yeah, so I sort of saw, I guess, the kind of social forces as being greater, but I was conscious of her gender, and when I kind of handed it over to my agent, you know, she's a woman, and my publisher is a woman as well, so I suppose I had a sense that if I was getting things wrong, they would pull me up on it, and they didn't. And so, fortunately, and no one has. And, you know, she the main character, I'm not being cute about saying the main character, as you know, her name isn't revealed until the very end, but like, she's very real to me. She's very, very real, and I can, like, almost see her. I can see her in a way more clearly than I could see Fab and Ben in Wimmera, despite the fact their stories were much closer to mine. Like, the main character, the Rip, I feel very close to her.
I'm so sorry, but that's maybe we've got 16 seconds. Does anyone have maybe one more really quick? No, I think that's it. Thank you so much, you guys. Thank you for coming. That was amazing.
Thanks. Thank you.
Just to remind you, you can buy books back there. These two guys will be signing stuff. So if you have any other questions that you didn't get to ask, just throw it at them while they're cornered in the table over there. Thanks so much for coming, guys.
Thank you.
Thanks, Christian.
Thank you.